Can a smile travel through time? Can an old photograph still change the mood of the person looking at it? And what happens when we spend time with smiling faces from another century? In this film, we move through the 20th century following smiles across portraits, family rooms, gardens, beaches, uniforms, and ordinary days. Some smiles are restrained, some barely arrive. Some seem to forget the camera is there. This is not only a history of smiling, it is a journey through the changing life of the smile in photography. Welcome to Reading Frames.
Chapter 1, 1900 to 1913.
A man in uniform stands in full, formal posture, but the face has already softened into a smile. Everything here is carefully arranged. The hat, the parasol, the pose, but again the expression is gentler than the form around it. Here the mood changes. She is not standing for the camera, but reclining, half-turned, in an interior softened by fabric and light. The photograph is still posed, but it no longer depends on upright stillness alone. With children, the face rarely settles into a single rule. One smile arrives at once, the other hardly does. And the arm across the shoulder matters. This is not only a portrait, it is also a small scene of closeness. Now the mood shifts again, not toward intimacy, but toward play. The chair becomes a prop, and the smile belongs to self-presentation. And here the photograph becomes something more than a portrait. What matters is not only the face, but the exchange between two people. The leaning body, the offered gesture, the shared moment. The camera is no longer holding stillness alone. It is beginning to hold a scene. In the years before the First World War, smiling is still not a fixed rule of photography, but it is already appearing in portraits, in play, in closeness, and in company.
Chapter 2, 1914 to 1918.
War changes the world around the photograph. The smile does not disappear, but it enters a harsher landscape of uniforms, camps, shelters, waiting, and improvised forms of life. At first, the change is not dramatic. The men still gather, still sit for the camera, still look outward from an ordinary human scene. But the ordinary scene is no longer ordinary. The table is makeshift. The room is provisional. Uniform has replaced civilian dress. The group portrait survives the war, but in altered form. Arms still rest on shoulders, faces still turn toward the lens, yet everything around them belongs to another order of life. Comradeship remains, but now it is framed by mud, timber, gear, and fatigue. Here, the front creates its own kind of interior, a shelter in the woods, a pause between duties, a world half-built, half-hidden. The men pose, but less stiffly than before. The war has not abolished the photograph. It has given it new ground to stand on. And then the tone shifts again, because the front does not produce only endurance and comradeship. It also produces display, bravado, rough humor, and scenes performed for the camera itself. Here the soldiers are not simply posing, they are staging a crude joke for the camera. The laughter matters. So does the group. This is not a private smile and not a quiet portrait. It is collective performance, rough, vulgar, and meant to be seen. What the photograph preserves is not battle, but a kind of frontline theater, a moment of masculine bravado, cruelty, play, and spectacle, compressed into one image. The next image goes further. Weapons are still here, but not in the solemn language of war. They have become props in a grotesque performance. The men aim, threaten, expose, exaggerate. What should inspire fear is turned into a joke, and the joke itself depends on violence. Again, this is not the official face of war. It is something far more unstable. Frontline humor shaped by danger, boredom, aggression, and the need to perform for one another. But war does not erase the rest of life. Beyond the front, people still gather in homes, gardens, and streets. Children still stand for photographs. Families still arrange themselves before the lens. The civilian world remains. Yet the war changes the whole atmosphere around it.
Chapter 3, 1919 to 1929.
When the war ends, photography does not return to its earlier calm. Something in posture, intimacy, and self-presentation has already changed. Now it moves more easily into streets, gardens, lakes, vehicles, family tables, and summer light. A small boat, a woman, a child. The water is calm. The gesture is simple. Rowing, sitting, looking. But something here has already changed. She is not posing as a figure of restraint. She is relaxed, turned slightly toward the camera, aware of being seen, and comfortable with it. The child looks directly at us. This is no longer a formal portrait. It is a moment taken from within life, not arranged against it. Here the body becomes even more present. She sits barefoot on wooden boards, wrapped in a light garment that feels almost incidental. The pose is not rigid, not symbolic, not formal. It is private, but shared. She allows the camera into a space that earlier photography would have kept closed, not because the rules disappeared, but because they have loosened. The body here is no longer hidden. It is displayed. Not as an exception, but as an object of attention in itself. Strength, balance, control, and a direct acknowledgement of the viewer. This kind of image would have been difficult to imagine a generation earlier. Now, it feels almost natural. 3 young men lie close to the ground. Their clothing shifts, something we expect to remain stable. At first glance, the image is ambiguous. On a closer look, the ambiguity seems intentional. This is not disguise for necessity. It may be play. It may be performance. It may be a moment staged for the camera itself. We cannot be sure. But what matters is this: the photograph no longer only records identity, it experiments with it. And then, a different kind of energy. A group gathered not in stillness, but in movement, laughter, interaction. They lean into the camera, not as subjects, but as participants. The photograph is no longer something that happens to them. It is something they enter. Across these images, something becomes clear. The photograph is no longer a place of restraint. It becomes a space of presence, of bodies, of relationships, of small performances of being seen. Not yet fully modern, but no longer held in place.
Chapter 4, 1930 to 1939.
By the 1930s, the smile has become quicker, more direct, more willing to meet the camera halfway. Photography now enters everyday life with greater ease, into leisure, sport, family scenes, flirtation, and play. The face no longer only presents itself, it responds. Here, the smile is no longer isolated in a single face. It moves through a group. One woman plays. One looks downward. One turns toward the camera with a softness that feels both casual and aware. This is not a stiff gathering, nor a fully staged portrait. The photograph catches companionship in motion. music, summer, and the pleasure of being together. Now the contact becomes more direct. She lies close to the ground, close to the lens, and smiles not into the distance, but toward us. The pose is playful. The expression knows exactly what it is doing. This is no longer only presence before the camera. It is a small act of address. Here the photograph becomes openly theatrical. The smile is part of a game, so is the raised finger, so is the little elephant treated almost like a scene partner. The image does not simply record happiness, it stages wit. And that matters, because by now the camera is not only a witness, it is something people can play with. Not every photograph shares its emotion equally. The man smiles with complete openness. The child does not. She turns toward the camera differently, guarded, serious, almost suspicious. And that difference matters. Even now, the smile is not a rule. It remains relational, uneven, dependent on who is being held and who is holding. And here, the smile becomes something else again. No pose, no self-presentation, no social mask. Only the body, the touch, the water, and laughter arriving faster than the photograph can fully contain it. At this point, the image no longer waits for composure. It captures delight in motion. By the late 1930s, the smile is no longer exceptional. It belongs to the photograph. It appears in streets, at tables, in gardens, by the water. But something else has changed. The smile no longer explains itself. It no longer asks to be understood. It simply happens, in front of the camera, and sometimes almost without it. And now when we look at these faces, we are not only looking back, we are participating in a moment that has already passed and is still able to change the way we see.
If this film brought a smile to your face, please like and subscribe to Reading Frames.